Welcome to the Stoic Responder Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Healy. As a special agent who spent more than 15 years conducting large-scale fraud, money laundering, and public corruption investigations, Stoic philosophy provided a mindset edge that became the foundation of my professional success. My mission today is to share those same ancient mindset lessons with you so that you can turn obstacles into opportunities and adversity into advantage. Time to muster up.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Stoic Responder Podcast. This is episode 90 of the podcast. And today, if you're listening to this as it drops, it's Wednesday. Had to push everything a day over this week because of a little road trip I took this weekend. I haven't really talked about it here, but we rescued a couple of puppies that were abandoned in our neighborhood and got them, vet care and took care of them, fostered them for the last month. And I drove to take one of them to meet its new family this past weekend. And so I normally do the prep work for the podcast on Sundays and get this thing out on a on a Tuesday through Friday schedule. But this week it's going to be Wednesday through Saturday because I was on the road and also spent some time on the road last week. I was in Alabama speaking at the Blue Watch Foundation Summit, the annual summit that they hold in Vestavia Hills, Alabama, right outside of Birmingham. Had the opportunity to talk about this very topic at the summit, to talk about stoicism and adversity and leadership and some other aspects of Stoic philosophy and how it impacted my career and helped me overcome burnout in my career, helped me become more capable in my law enforcement career. And I got to meet with and speak with a great group of people. A lot of other speakers were presenting as well. And it was a great little conference to go to and pop in on. And any trip to Alabama is time well spent for me. I love Birmingham, beautiful area. If you've never been, hilly, very pretty. Only the slightest amount of trees changing this time of year. Not quite New England. But you had a little bit of hint of fall in the air compared to Houston. So it was a nice little trip and only about a day away from the 90-degree heat down in Houston, but it was a nice little trip. So back and here for the entire week. Got 4 episodes coming to you. Before we get started, let me tell you about 2 organizations that I love to represent. Number one is the Overwatch Collective, nonprofit and podcast funding therapy sessions and supporting mental health initiatives for our first responders, our veterans, and their families. Their motto is one more is one less. And what that means is one more individual that we can provide life-saving mental health services to is one less potential statistics. So please check them out, theoverwatchcollective.com. Make a donation if you can, buy some gear if you can, and support their incredible mission. And I also like to give a shout out to Blue Badge Coffee Company. The mission of Blue Badge Coffee Company is to provide customers not only with the best, highest quality premium coffee that their money can buy, but also to take a portion of each sale and donate it to law enforcement agencies around the United States to assist them in funding or maintaining peer support and wellness programs. With all of the defund the police mania going on around the country, those peer support and wellness programs are some of the first things to get cut when departments are forced to make tough choices. And that leads to our police not getting the help that they need, not getting the support that they need. Blue Badge is doing what they can to make up the difference by providing a portion of each sale to those law enforcement agencies around the country to help maintain those critical programs that are crucial for the physical and mental well-being of our hardworking police officers. So you can check them out at bluebadgecoffee.com, support their mission, get yourself some coffee, get yourself some gear. It's super important that organizations like the Overwatch Collective and Blue Badge Coffee Company are out there giving back and supporting. And these are organizations that are run by active duty law enforcement officers. So make sure you support them if you get a chance. And if you have an organization that supports our law enforcement community, I don't charge anything for shout outs, for advertisements. I'm not looking to make a buck by talking about your organization. I just want to make sure that organizations that are supporting our law enforcement are getting the word spread about them in an audience that trends towards law enforcement. So if you have an organization that's similarly situated that is providing care and assistance to our community, please let me know about it and I would be happy to talk about it on the podcast. All right, let's get into the meat of the episode. I try to keep these under 15 minutes. I'm always looking at the clock, so let's get into it. Episode 90, the title here is Delight in Receiving Advice. Let me start you off with a quote from Seneca. A good man delights in receiving advice. All the worst men are the most impatient of guidance. All right. If you're law enforcement, if you're in the first responder community, this is probably going to hit home because I talked about this actually in my speech that I gave in Alabama last week. One of the big issues in law enforcement that I've seen, at least at the federal level, is this penchant for promoting problems, this penchant for having an issue with an individual in the field and not being able to terminate them or get rid of them and just kicking them up the chain, so that you find yourself, not always, but you find yourself in the course of your career running into people in your chain of command who failed upwards, who found themselves like that turtle on the fence post. You don't know how it got there, and it has been elevated far above its capacity to operate. We see that a lot in the federal government. I suspect you see that a lot in state, local, county, first responder jobs as well. And those are those people who have been elevated above their station to perform, those people who have been put in a position, not by experience, not by hard work, not by merit, but by who they know, or worse yet, by promoting the problem. Those are the people most likely to take advice. Those are the people, as Seneca says, most impatient of guidance. Well, Seneca was himself an advisor. He was an advisor to Nero. We're going to get into that real quick. But to give you some historical perspective, Seneca lived at roughly the same time as Christ. In fact, some of the historical records suggest that they may have been born the same year. So, keep this in mind as you're thinking about Seneca. The time and place that he existed in the Roman Empire is the same time as, Christ was making his mark on Israel, on what is now Israel, on the Middle East. So he lives about that same time. It's possible, actually, that he was aware of the Hebrew Bible. In particular, it's possible he was aware of the book of Proverbs, because that had been around, right? And so the book of Proverbs has this focus on the theme of wisdom, which is a virtue that's also cherished by Stoics like Seneca. And in the book of Proverbs, they talk about wisdom by saying, fools think their own way is right, but the wise listen to others. That's Proverbs 12:15, if you're looking at the New Living Translation of your Bible. That, if you're reading what Seneca wrote here, a good man delights in receiving advice, all the worst men are the most impatient of guidance. It's pretty much verbatim. It's the same thing. Fools think their own way is right, but the wise listen to others. So whether you're taking this advice from a secular source like Seneca or from a biblical source like Proverbs, you're getting that same advice. And whether he was inspired by Proverbs or by his own often ignored counsel of the corrupt and debauched Emperor Nero, who he counseled until Seneca's death, Seneca understood that ego would impede the advancement of wisdom. And that is one of the cardinal virtues. That's something we're supposed to be seeking out as Stoics, as practitioners of this philosophy. And he understood that ration requires us actually to seek out advice from others and improve our own understanding of the world. It's this idea that the ego is the enemy. Ryan Holiday, the kind of modern day Stoic author, talks about this. He actually titled one of his books, Ego is the Enemy, and talks a lot about this, how it prevents us from learning. It prevents us from gaining wisdom that might make us better. When we shut off any outside advice and won't listen to others because we believe too greatly, we get too high on our own supply, I guess is how I would put it in modern terms. Look, throughout your career, you're going to receive copious amounts of unsolicited advice, whether that's from your shift supervisor, from your, whatever, if you're state, federal, local, I don't know, whatever the title is. There's going to be people who are giving you advice. Maybe people who are not qualified to give advice, whether they are a leader, whether they are a manager, whether they are a subordinate or a colleague. You're going to get that advice whether you want it or not. And it's tempting to tune it all out, right? It's tempting to say, I know better than anyone else. But doing so has the potential to make your job more difficult than it needs to be, and can limit you to a single source for solving problems, which is, of course, yourself. We talk about this a lot in law enforcement. You're always going to be visited when you're giving a search warrant briefing to a room full of people. You're always going to be visited by two fairies, two little magical creatures. The what if fairy, and the good idea fairy. They're always going to visit. And they're usually going to visit in the form of someone sitting in the audience listening to your briefing. Someone's going to give you the what if this, or someone's going to give you, have you thought about that? And it's tempting to shut those people down. It's tempting to say, hey, I've got this all squared away. I figured everything out. I don't need your advice. Shut up. What I would advise you to do is to maybe say, hey, listen, let's talk afterwards. I'd love to hear you out on this, right? This isn't the time or place. Let's move forward with the briefing, but let's chat afterwards, right? Because if you don't listen to other people, if you don't take some of that unsolicited advice, that offered advice, you never, ever are going to hear the potential of a good idea, right? You're never going to hear the potential of it. They may be horrible ideas. They usually are when those two magical creatures visit a briefing. But if you don't listen, if you don't hear it out, if you shut it down, if you tune all that stuff out, you're relying internally on your own abilities entirely. And sometimes the best ideas come from things that you haven't thought of. Look, it's hard to admit that we're flawed. It's hard to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers personally. But to foolishly believe that our ideas are better than anyone else's allows pride to stand in the way of our potential progress. I think Dan Crenshaw did a really good job of describing this in his book, Fortitude. He talked about the importance of deferring to everyone else on the team before making a decision. He was, for those that don't know, Congressman Dan Crenshaw. He's a Houston area congressman. He was a Navy SEAL. He was I don't know what his rank was, but he was a commander. He was an officer. He was a leader of a SEAL team. And he talks about in his book, Fortitude, how it's important to, when you're doing a briefing, if somebody says, hey, what about this? Here's a target that we need to take. Here's a house that we need to, there's something in that house we need to get to. How are we going to tackle this particular problem? And that just because you're the most senior guy, or just because you're the leader, just because you're the one with stripes or stars on your shoulders, doesn't mean that you've got the best idea. Maybe the guy who's fresh out of the teams has an idea that you never considered because there's a problem-solving evolution that he went through in training that you never got to go through. And maybe he's got an idea for you that's going to allow you to attack this problem more effectively and efficiently. He talks about the importance of listening to those people, and that if they're right, deferring to them, letting your ego fade away, not relying on those stripes or those stars on your shoulders, and letting that get in the way of doing the mission first and doing the mission the best way possible. So the same is true for you. The same is true for all of us. One of the other speakers, I'll end you on this note, one of the other speakers at the conference that I was at last week was an old retired FBI guy, and he talked about the way that leadership used to be done. It was because I said so. Police and law enforcement agencies were very top down, right? It was, I have the control because I am in charge, and your job is to follow orders. There was no servant leadership aspect of law enforcement at the time. And he told a story about one time asking a supervisor why he was being assigned to do something. And the supervisor said, I'll give you 3 reasons, and pointed to the 3 stripes on his shirt, meaning he was the sergeant. I'll give you three reasons. Here's, 3 stripes. And that's that's akin to your parents telling you because I said so. As a parent, I'm always tempted to say that when my kid asks why, but sometimes being challenged gives me the opportunity to actually explain why it's a good idea, and then to listen to why she thinks it's not. And I've yet to be proven wrong by my 11-year-old, but I have been proven wrong in the work environment before when I've gone back and forth and actually accepted advice and taken counsel from others. So let's not be foolishly believing that our ideas are better than anyone and everyone else's. Let's not let pride stand in the way of our progress. Let's accept advice with humility and openness. We don't have to accept and apply every piece of it that's given, but we should always delight in receiving it, as both Seneca and the Bible remind us. Folks, that's what I got for you today. Let me leave you with a journal prompt to send you on your way. Actually, this is more of an advice instead of a journal prompt today. What I would like you to do today is seek advice and counsel from a colleague and delight in receiving it. So if you've got a problem that you think you have a good solution to, go out and ask a colleague that you normally wouldn't ask for advice for what they would do in this situation. And maybe they offer you something that you would have never considered. And that will remind you to kill your ego every now and again. So folks, a couple of ways you can support this podcast. Number 1, pick up a copy of my book. It's available on Amazon. It is called In Valor, 365 Stoic Meditations for First Responders. It's on Amazon, like I said, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you get your books. It's a great way for you to incorporate and practice this philosophy in your daily lives. It's going to give you some quotes, some contextualization, some journal prompts, some action items to allow you to take this advice and apply it to your job, and hopefully give you some operating philosophy to make your life a little bit easier. Number 2, you can subscribe to the Substack channel that we've got going. It's called the stoicresponder.substack.com. If you do that, you're going to get all 4 episodes per week free in your email, so you'll never miss one. It's completely free. Go ahead and sign up for that. And then when I do write advice columns, when I do write leadership columns and personal development tips, you will get that as well via the Substack. And finally, like, share, and subscribe this podcast so that others can find out what we're doing here and take advantage of this life-changing philosophy. Thanks so much, folks. Got 3 more episodes coming your way this week. Until next time, you are out of roll.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, like, rate, and share this podcast so that we can spread the benefits of Stoicism to other first responders. It will only take you a few moments, but it can help us tremendously. Until next time, out of roll.